Hey, welcome to UCD's Centre for Irish Towns Talking Towns webinar series. This is the first in the autumn series of Talking Towns. The session is being recorded and the session will be uploaded to the Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel in due course. So welcome everybody and thanks for joining us this afternoon. I would ask you to mute your microphone while the session is in progress if you haven't already. Many thanks for that. So to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Wall. I'm an architect and researcher, currently carrying out a PhD on the low carbon transition of Irish towns, and specifically the role that the new European Bauhaus can play in this process. I'll be chairing today's session. And today, and just a brief description of what we're trying to achieve with Talking Towns. So the aim of the Centre for Irish Towns is to build a network of people interested in Irish towns and generate conversations about challenges facing towns and the role that research can play and policy can play in addressing them. These Talking Towns webinars are one mechanism we have for doing this. So the series is curated this year by myself and Dr. Anna Skura, who you can see on screen. Anna is on the Centre for Irish Towns Working Group and project manager for the Building Stories project. We will have 3 webinars this autumn. Each will have a different theme and focus. We will have one in November and one in December, with details in due course. So watch this space for extra information. All previous sessions are available on the Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel. So today we're looking at the town of Ballina. Now, County Mayo, a very beautiful part of the world. In recent years, Ballina has been involved in a number of research projects which have contributed to what I think is a creative and exciting rethinking of several pressing issues related to the town. The projects combine knowledge and inputs from local authority, community groups, elected representatives, professionals, and academic researchers. I and several colleagues here in UCD have acted as academic partners in many of these projects, and we will hear more about these as this afternoon's session progresses. A notable success in this story was the Ripple Community Garden, co-designed by the residents of the Green Hills estate in the town, which became the first Irish winner of a new European Bauhaus Prize. So today we have 3 speakers who I think are well positioned to shed light on these projects and the impacts that they have had on the town. The first speaker is Independent Councillor Mark Duffy, who has helped to initiate these projects and the contacts that made them possible. Architect Kevin Loftus runs the Accelerating Change Together, or ACT practice in Ballina, and brings architectural expertise to these projects. And finally, Dr. Sarah Cottrell, who is a colleague of mine in UCD and will speak about her experience on the academic side of several of these projects. So we'll begin. We will have about 10 minutes per speaker, and then we will have a questions and answer session at the end. If you would like to ask any questions to any of our speakers, just place the question as a comment in the chat. And if you could make it clear who the comment or question is aimed at, that would be very helpful. So we'll kick off today with Mark. Councillor Mark Duffy is an independent county councillor serving as Mayo's youngest representative. Recently re-elected, so congratulations, Mark. He was member of the US Embassy's Youth Council, where he was chosen as one of 2 delegates to join the Shamrock ceremony at the White House. Former mayor of Ballina, Mark had the honour of welcoming President Biden during his homecoming visit to the town in front of a 27,000-strong crowd. Last year, Mark was selected as Ireland's only representative to be a part of the class of 2023 German Marshall Fund's Transatlantic Inclusion Leadership Network, with a diverse group of young leaders from across North America and Europe. Locally, Mark co-founded a volunteer group which has had more than 1,000 members in the past 5 years, as well as leading an initiative for Ballina to become Ireland's greenest town. Mark is also leading a community-led revival of a historic convent in Ballina to protect it from decline and bring it back into use to meet current and future needs of the town. So Mark, I'll hand over to you if you would like to tell us a little bit about your experience in Ballina.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honour to be asked to tell our story of Ballina, a town that we're obviously all very proud and passionate about. A little bit of background into Ballina. It's located in North Mayo in the northwest of Ireland, for those who are not so familiar. And growing up in Ballina, obviously during Celtic Tiger eras, there was a lot of development and positive projects as a young person growing up in the town, looking from the outside in. In 2014, it was a dark time economically for the town. and for the country generally, where so many people left and moved abroad and emigrated all across the world. But it was also a time when the local authority town councils were abolished. So it removed a lot of the civic decision making and leadership within the town. I was living and working. I was one of those. I'm from a family of 13 children, the second youngest. So a lot of my family and a lot of my friends would have migrated to larger populations and centres, whether it's Dublin or Cork or Galway. And many more would have emigrated to across Europe or to the Middle East or Australia or North America. And living and working in Dublin in financial services marketing, I always thought about Ballina and how it has such great potential and has great opportunity, but maybe it's time to try and do something about it. So I relocated back home in 2019, ran for the local council elections, and thankfully it was successful. Around about the time that I'd moved home, I was always over and back, like many do, in many of the towns across the country. Moved back and was playing football at weekends while living and working in Dublin, but moved back home full time. And instead of talking or complaining about the state or the affairs of the town, we as a community took action and said, well, instead of complaining, we're going to take action. We're going to mobilize people. We're going to empower people, because there's so many people who feel very positively about the town and feel passionate about it, but there was no vehicle to exercise that energy. So we set up a community group. It's grown to over 1,000 volunteers over the past 6 years now, actually, since it was originally founded. And that was a great foundation point in terms of the beginning of the revival of Ballina. And it was just while involved with the US Embassy Youth Council, I had met a man called John O'Loughlin Kennedy, who was the founder of Concern. And Concern was founded to respond to the famine in Biafra. And I was at an event one night, and he said, we met for 1 hour every week until we solved the problem of the famine. So it was a huge task or undertaking, but it was broken down into small, achievable steps. So we took the same model of meeting for 1 hour on a Saturday morning from 8 to 9 a.m. and try to tackle little problems in the town, to improve biodiversity in the town, to enhance tired or old grey buildings within the town with pops of colour. And while the interventions that we made were very effective and very positive in terms of improving the conditions visibly of the town, the most positive outcome of it was that we had now a mobilized people and an empowered community that now felt that we could affect positive change and we could lead the change and be the change for the town. So that was very much a bottom-up, grassroots led effort. And while advocating for Ballina in the local elections in 2019, I spoke about the opportunity of remote working, and this was before obviously a pandemic hit and created this sea change in terms of the way we work and the opportunity and possibilities for market towns that had lost so many people to urban centres. So at that time, through COVID, I met with Kevin Loftus, who you'll hear from shortly. Kevin was living and working in Rotterdam and has incredible experience in terms of sustainable architecture, and put forward the vision for Ballina to become Ireland's greenest town. So the two of us worked together, putting forward that initiative, which Kevin will give a lot more detail on. And again, that was sharing a more strategic vision. So while we had a grassroots mobilized group on the ground, now we had something to work towards. And Kevin set out that vision. My role in the local authority as a councillor was a conduit to enable these changes to policy and to introduce that leadership from a formal level within the local authority. So that was a brilliant success and led to our work with the Centre for Irish Towns within UCD. And that has just gone from strength to strength and really legitimise what we're trying to do. So we had initially a project that Stephen mentioned in the Green Hills housing estate, which is a disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged estate in a town that has many socioeconomic and issues and high deprivation, but it also has a brilliant population of people. There's not that crime that you may associate with, say, other disadvantaged populations. So we delivered the community garden, the Ripple project, and that was again empowering people. Then that has followed on to a second project called Cascade, which Sarah will be able to talk a little bit more on. But we also now are working with, across Europe on a project called Heritage. And Ballina, being a historic town, it's celebrated its 300th anniversary in 2023, has many heritage buildings. And again, they have been at risk of decline. One in particular is the Old Sisters of Mercy Convent of the Immaculate Conception. And based on our decisions as a town, where we mobilized people, where we got engaged, where we were able to demonstrate that we were leading a new future for the town, one of the local sisters who used to live in the convent contacted me to encourage a regeneration project of that building. It's 30,000 square feet building, incredible architecture and history and heritage that was, if not addressed or not intervened, would become a modern day kind of abbey or ruin that you see right across the landscape. The convent closed 16 years ago due to a decline in numbers, and has been vandalized, but has an incredible potential to serve the needs of the community. So thankfully, the Heritage project through the UCD Centre for Irish Towns will help us to look at that building and to understand its potential to respond to the needs of the community. And currently we have work ongoing repairing windows, and we're working towards a partial reopening of the convent for event and community use by the end of this year. So this is very exciting that we've been able to mobilize ourselves as a town and as an area, that we've built the capacity within the town, working with expertise like the Centre for Irish Towns. This also led to a connection with the University of Notre Dame, who have a church property initiative, who were able to lend us, again, incredible expertise and also help kind of legitimize what we're doing and give us more kind of support and authority on the direction that we've been trying to move. Because when it is grassroots led, we have to gain trust and gain confidence within the local authority, as well as the community more broadly. So by us demonstrating our willingness to lead as a community, that gave confidence to the likes of the Sisters of Mercy, who have gifted an incredible building back over to the town, to a charity that we have set up to lead the revival of it. So just to summarize, from small beginnings of empowering people, taking action, whether it was just picking up a packet of crisps wrapper or a bottle, or painting a building, or planting a tree, or planting a flower in by improving the town aesthetically and in biodiversity, that has led to a series of incredible supports through UCD, but also through governmental investment on a range of projects, and the power of taking that first step, while daunting and not knowing where to start, has led to multi-million euro investment, and has teed up multi-million euro investment into various projects right across the town. So anyone who is in any situation or scenario that sounds maybe similar to this, we'd love to help and support and offer whatever experience we've had in bringing it to this stage. And we'd love to learn and connect and share whatever we have to learn, and collaborate with other towns and areas right across the country, because there are so many market towns with similar populations of our own that have young people. When I lived and worked in Dublin, it was the same, people from Tralee or Carrick and Shannon all living and working in Dublin, traveling home at the weekends to play Gaelic football or to play soccer or to spend time with their families. So forced migration is something that I have an issue with, but If people want to migrate or emigrate or explore, that's great. But I think we now have an opportunity to correct that and create a place that responds to the demands and needs of community today to make it a great place to live for young and old. And that's what we're working towards and trying to do. And we're really grateful for the support of UCD Centre for Irish Towns for doing that. So I'll stop my screen share, and thank you so much for your time in listening.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and thanks very much for your experience there. Very helpful, and I hope that other people maybe on the call who are interested in replicating the success of Ballina can get some inspiration from you. Our next speaker is Kevin Loftus, who is an architect and design director at ACT, which is Accelerating Change Together, a social enterprise of architects, designers, and policy specialists that have been established to accelerate the green transition in the built environment. Kevin is a native of Ballina and spent over a decade living and working internationally, including in China at Bureau Ole Schuren and in the Netherlands before returning to Ballina to set up ACT. Through his current practice, Kevin works with communities and organizations to develop design proposals for sustainable futures. So Kevin, I will hand over to you if you want to take it away.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so I'll pick up, I suppose, where Mark left off there in terms of the initial impetus or inspiration for the vision that we developed together was really, I suppose, looking from abroad back at home at the good work that was being done by Mark and others in that COVID time where people were locked down but able to get out or when they weren't locked down, able to get out at a distance, picking up litter, doing biodiversity actions. And looking from a distance, it was one of the first times I really seen positive energy in the town at the scale that it was happening there. Very often, as Mark talked about, this idea of forced migration, there has been a decline in a lot of Irish towns over the last number of decades. And because of that, people have in some ways maybe missed the quality or they missed the what's special about these towns. And part of what we're trying to do through the vision is to rediscover that. So when I contacted Mark, was very much inspired by what he was doing with the other community groups. It got a conversation going, and that led to the development of a vision. And eventually that vision led to a number of other projects that are linked. And one of the things I want to get across here is the importance of having something cohesive that everybody can move towards, and having that high level goal that will lead to other benefits, other projects, other opportunities down the line. I will share screen here just to, let's see if this works. So can you see my screen there? Right there. I think I'm showing presenter notes, am I?
Yes, you are.
All right, swap screens. There we go. So as Mark was saying, this energy that was happening in the town, you could see people engaged in litter picking, biodiversity actions, painting. That really was the impetus for me to get involved and try and see how I could contribute towards this energy. And it was in a way before I ever imagined coming back to Ballina, but that led to the establishment of ACT and the office very much from this initial project. We set out this high level goal of how we can become Ireland's greenest town. So being really aspirational, but in doing that, allowing people who might have an interest in mobility or biodiversity or whatever it is to come together under something that's cohesive and that harnesses everybody's energy. So having this high level goal allowed us to bring together community, public bodies, but also private business. And I'd add to that, I suppose, expertise as well. Mark has already mentioned UCD, the Centre for Irish Towns, and the support that we've gained from that has been huge. I won't go through the whole presentation in a lot of detail, so I'm going to be flicking over slides here, but we really tried to understand, looking at the fabric, what were the opportunities that exist, and then to visualize that. So showing this back to people, how a street can be turned into a place for people, how we can start to see residential areas being upgraded to become more energy efficient, but also more welcoming, and how we can extend public space, bringing nature back into the heart of our towns. How we might reimagine laneways, for example, making them welcoming places to come, but also move through and even stay. So having this knock-on effect that can benefit the local economy. How we could look at boosting biodiversity in areas that are already natural spaces, but also extending public active travel infrastructure from the heart of the town out towards the periphery, so that we make active travel not just feasible, but also enjoyable. And how we can look at green spaces in the centre of these towns, are center of the estates within the town, and these are sort of ubiquitous everywhere. So how can we reimagine these spaces to be inclusive, fun, but also places that are adding to the resilience of a community? We set out 5 key themes: having a people-centric Ballina, a circular Ballina, an ecological Ballina, a fit and mobile Ballina, and an energy-independent Ballina. So these 5 key themes then allowed other people to see where they can plug in their expertise. The vision itself was sort of structured as having a high-level goal, which had 5 core key areas. And then from that, a key target that we embedded in best practice. So for example, the idea of the 10-minute town, can we have that as our sort of North Star for how we look at mobility? And then from those core targets, 3 key strategies. And again, this is trying to embed best practice in what we're doing. So the high level vision is very much inspired from the community and the actions that were already underway, but we're also embedding best practice through what we're trying to do. The vision itself was the starting point, but it very soon took legs in different directions. We've had the Mary Robinson Centre and Ballina Chamber of Commerce. We've had the Ballina Community Cleanup. We've had loads of other groups come in under this vision to try and see how they can support. So we've had actions around circularity, the development of a circular economy initiative within the town that supports businesses that already practice that. We've had the development of an energy master plan by Ballina SEC. We've had trial pedestrianisation undertaken in the town, where people have seen what the town could look like if we really start to prioritise people. We've had the Ballina Community Cleanup leading on a project to plant 10,000 trees, so 1 for everybody in the town over the period of last year. The vision itself was also picked up, led by Mark, but voted on by other councillors to become a core theme of the local authority going forward. And many of the goals and objectives and even the strategies that we've developed have now been implemented in the local area development plan, or at least the draft version. We've seen the council support it in terms of the creation and hosting of climate action events in the town. And as Mark has mentioned, through the connection with UCD Centre for Irish Towns, which originally came through Orla Murphy and then Philip Crowe, we were able to leverage the vision to engage in a number of research funded projects. So Harrytact is an example of one of the projects that's currently running, and that project touches on the convent building that Mark has mentioned. We've also had the old Garda barracks being developed into a proposal for a new art centre, which the RHA would look at taking over. So really using what started as a broad vision, channeling it down into specific projects that then get capital works funding is a method or an approach that allows a community to leverage all of the assets that they have, whether that's physical or social, the people being the most important asset of any community, really. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of where we've been from the inception of the vision to where we are now. And two of the key projects that came through that were the Ripple project and the Cascade project, which Sarah has been very much involved in. So I might hand that over to you, Sarah, just to take it from there.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'll just say a word of introduction to Sarah before we let Sarah join in. Dr. Sarah Cottrell is an assistant professor here in UCD's School of Civil Engineering, focusing on sustainable water management and resilience. Her research has a strong public and community engagement focus, and she has worked with stakeholders across public, private, and third sector organizations. Sarah's work has influenced Irish government policy and has featured in the media on RTE, in the Irish Times, on BBC, amongst others. Her presentation today will cover two collaborative community-based projects, both of which were funded by Creative Ireland. The first project, Ripple, as I said earlier, won a new European Bauhaus Award in 2023. And the second project, Cascade, is ongoing until December 2025. So Sarah's presentation is titled "A Ripple of Change Can Become a Cascade, a story of community collaboration on climate action." So Sarah, please take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. To share my screen. So yeah, as Stephen introduced there, this is a story of community collaboration on climate action. And I'm going to briefly talk about the two projects that you can see here on the screen, both of which were based in Ballina. And my perspective here is showing how academics can work with local activists, with practitioners, with residents on the ground to drive positive change. So really building on the examples that Mark and Kevin gave previously. Both of these projects were funded by Creative Ireland through their Creative Climate Action Fund. And Ripple on the left-hand side was based in the Green Hills estate in Ballina, and that was in 2022. And during that time, we sought to evaluate whether public green spaces, these large areas of land that are common in housing estates throughout Ireland, represent a significant untapped potential for climate action, and that they could become cohesive public spaces. But then in Cascade, which is a following on project from that, we wanted to trial the same methodology. So this project started in October last year, and it's a longer project. We only had 12 months in Ripple, and we have just over 2 years in Cascade. We're taking the same approach, but looking at the grey space rather than the green, and starting to think about how the laneways of our historic town centres can adapt to cope with increased rainfall from climate change in a way that makes these public spaces socially cohesive and beautiful, and crucially activated that they're being used. So Ripple used a participatory process through 6 workshops and several additional supporting events throughout 2022. And we were essentially looking at trying to capture experience, perspectives, knowledge from people in the estates about their neighbourhood green space, their understanding of water and climate change, but also their aspirations and their hopes for the area. And so we used those and channeled those into designing together a number of different solutions. There were 16 potential ideas that were put forward to manage the movement of water, to improve biodiversity, and to increase the amenity value of part of the estate. It was a collaborative process and very participatory. You can see just down here from kind of co-design, there was a process of voting that took place. So they could select the idea that they had put forward as their favourite. And what that was something that we called the Paradise Garden. It was a haven for wildlife and nature and people. It reimagined a part of the estate that was damp and boggy, but it had great potential to become a climate resilient space and an inclusive amenity for everyone within that. We worked with nature-based landscape architect Roisin Byrne and the community to develop the design, to take what was a concept sketch through to something that could physically be built by local contractors. And the garden and the co-design methodology is essentially the origin of the ripple effect. It's trying to extend outwards from the Green Hills community into a much larger community. So during the year, there was a number of connections made between people in that place. So connections between people within Green Hills Estate, with the local Karen Community Garden in Ballina, with ecologist Martin McGarrigle, you can see there at the bottom, who led a workshop looking at water health in the River Bursna, which turned out to be quite good and will hopefully be improved by the addition of the garden that we put in. The garden itself, this is what it looked like after it had a little bit of time to bed in and establish. You can see at the top there, it includes raised vegetable beds. It has a mini orchard of heritage apple trees. There's seating, there's native pollinator friendly planting, there's a tree nursery. And the way that it works is that ultimately water is gathered and directed kind of through the garden, slowing the flow of heavy rain and allowing the planting to take up the water so that that runoff isn't coming off from the estate, from the roads in the estate down into that river and potentially affecting the water quality. And the project included a kind of evaluation process at the end, and we did something that's called ripple effect mapping. And the plan was to map that ripple effect, the hope being that the positive impact of being empowered to make local change and be involved at every step of the process would ripple out, create connection and spark actions and projects going forward. So we tried to tease out in detail the ways in which the residents had engaged with the project, find out what their highlights were, what forms of engagement or involvement they had enjoyed, maybe ones that they didn't enjoy so much, how they had been facilitated to connect with other people in the estate that they might not normally have spoken to, and how they would see themselves using and engaging with the garden that we've built after the project finished. So it was only really by going through this evaluation process that we found out some of the key impacts from the project that maybe would have been missed in a traditional questionnaire. So one participant noticed, so I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but that there's only 20 people attending each workshop, but 100 people or so supporting it in the estate. That people said that it had led to increased intergenerational social interactions and that it gave people a positive story in the estate. So we had about 80 unique participants, I suppose, that came to these events, which was about 40% of the households in that area. But it was the fact that it was rippling out. So some people weren't able to attend the events, but they were still talking about it and sharing conversations after the event. So as Stephen mentioned before, we submitted Ripple into the 2023 New European Bauhaus Prizes. And these prizes celebrate and award inspiring examples of projects that seek to make towns and cities across Europe sustainable, beautiful, and inclusive. And there was something like 1,400 applications that were shortlisted, that applied to this, about 60 applications that were shortlisted as finalists. And Ripple was one of just 5 winners in the main categories, winning the Connecting to Nature category. It also featured on RTE 61 News during last year's Mary Robinson's Climate Conference and was a runner-up in the Tidy Towns Water and Communities Award as well. So on the back of Ripple, the project team reapplied for a follow-on project to test this kind of radically inclusive methodology and creative participatory approach in a slightly more challenging setting. So we, instead of looking at the green space, which it's easier, particularly, I suppose I'm a civil engineer, from an engineering perspective, to build something in a grassy area, we wanted to look at it in a more challenging urban setting where we're looking at the built environment and a much larger proportion of stakeholders, different complexities in terms of land ownership. So we sought to use the same workshop-based approach, but in the heritage quarter of Ballina, and we were aiming to create points of connection for communities around climate action that would allow them to celebrate water whilst transforming the laneways of Ballina. So we have the same project team as we had in Ripple. There's 3 academics based in UCD Centres for Irish Towns. So that's myself, Philip and Orla. We had a project coordinator, Rebecca, who was managing the logistics and the communications, the event management throughout both projects. We had the 2 representatives of Ballina Greenest Town, Kevin and Mark, and we had a practicing artist, Rina Nail. And so we had this mix of expertise of, registered architects that would be specialists in engaging in spatial practice and specialists in Irish towns. And we had myself, my expertise is in water systems. And we had an elected official, for Mayo County Council, and a creative practitioner. So it was a really diverse skill set that brought together for us to engage with the community, both in Ripple and now in Cascade. So we're only 6 to 9 months into what is just over a 2-year project in Cascade. So we've only really gone through the first 2 stages of story mapping and co-design, but we've held walking tours to discuss the lanes, drains and water mains of Ballina. We've observed places that are a little bit unloved and thought about how they could be more beautiful. We've shared an anonymous questionnaire. We've physically surveyed the lanes and looked at where there is the decay and where there is potential for things to be moved or to be altered or modified. And crucially, we've captured people's stories of the use and occasional misuse of these public spaces. In the co-design phase, we have held workshops. We've had artist-led workshops. We've installed these post boxes in the laneways throughout the town to collect anonymous ideas. We facilitated a session on local democracy and making your voice heard. We've worked with businesses, schools, members of the public. And through all of that, we've been trying to kind of draw, design and refine ideas for 4 of these laneways in that critical heritage area. We then worked with Kevin's architecture practice, ACT, to create sketches from these ideas so that we can communicate them to people, but that they can demonstrate ways that these grey spaces can become more climate resilient and socially cohesive. And as I mentioned earlier, crucially, kind of activated spaces that are being used. So this evening, we're hosting an event as part of the Ballina Fringe Festival, another great initiative that runs in the town of Ballina, where we'll showcase an exhibition of these sketches, and then they'll be projected onto the old Ballina Mineral Water Company building after dark over the weekend, again as a different way of engaging people and showing them about these ideas. So you can see 2 of the ideas here. And as we move forward into the future stages, we'll be trying to develop each of these sketches further. They're very conceptual at the minute so that people can still bring their own ideas and ownership to them. And we'll take one of them and we will then look to implement that. And we're not sure at this stage if it will be doing something quite permanent like we did with Ripple, or whether we'll take a tactical urbanism approach. So installing something quick and temporary, something very action orientated so that we can assess the public engagement and acceptance of that solution. But regardless of which one we do, and obviously some ideas will be better suited to a tactical urbanism approach than others, we hope that this making stage can serve as a demonstrator of what can be done, and it can help us build support for implementing more of these ideas beyond the project's lifespan. So one of the key outputs of what we're trying to do is create a negotiated plan, a cohesive and coherent vision, very much like Kevin was talking about earlier, thinking about how each of these solutions that we've co-designed together as a community fit together within the Heritage Quarter in a way that connects the trails of laneways to celebrate water, both from a public space point of view, so that we're not duplicating solutions in the same laneways, but also thinking about it from the management of water and that they connect. And the negotiated plan and the demonstrator together will be used post-project to leverage follow-on funding for that kind of capital works implementation. So legacy is really important to us. And because of this, we need to evaluate what works using things like the REM model, or ACT have a great SDG tool that you can use to see what targets you're delivering against. And then we can evaluate what works in these projects and identify how this plan can be implemented, brought to life, essentially so that those valuable ideas, time and resources that have been invested in those kind of participatory processes is not in vain. So critical to that, I suppose, is ensuring that there's resources and capacity, not only to deliver those things, but also to adopt and maintain them after they're installed. And so I think that's a great note to end on for the discussion, as adopting and maintaining and legacy of these kinds of projects is often, I suppose, one of the trickiest parts of these community-led infrastructure or participatory engagement projects.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks to all our contributors for a very interesting series of talks. I'd like to invite the audience now if they have any questions for the panel, and I see a couple coming in already, so that's great. Just put your question in the comment box. But before we do that, we've had a very fascinating contributions from representatives of elected representatives in the person of Mark, Kevin, the professional architect local, and Sarah, the academic partner. The other key contributor would be to these projects would be the local authority. Would the panel, or perhaps you, Kevin or Mark, be able to share some of the role that the local authority has played in some of these activities?
Sure. So thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Anna, and the team. The local authority have been very active. Obviously, when we began with Kevin with the Ireland's Greenest Town, we adopted that through the local authority. So that kind of set the policy level at the most kind of highest level on the ground within the town. But in terms of actual and active engagement, we're very lucky to have Tom Gilligan, the Director of Services with the responsibility for Ballina, who is so invested and has been so invested in all of these projects, enabling them, working with us on it, as well as Declan Turnbull, who is the head of the district, and indeed Siobhan Sexton. I think Siobhan was on the call, or maybe still is. And Siobhan is a conservation officer with Mayo County Council. So a lot of the capital works side of things, Siobhan has been instrumental in supporting on heritage buildings. So it is really important, and we will have ambassadors and champions, because there are different degrees of enthusiasm, I suppose, within any organization, but having active champions and people who are passionate about community, passionate about the environment, passionate about the revival and regeneration of the town, we give these people who are that way an opportunity to mobilize and work with us. So it's really important that we have, I suppose, that would be my role as an elected representative, to be the conduit between the civil service side of things and the community side of things and the academic side of things. So but we're very fortunate in the town that we've had great engagement with the local authority. I just might answer Anna's question in relation to examples of capital projects, and just give you a flavour of the convent revival. I just want to, if you can see my screen again, I just want to show the page here. So this is the convent revival. So in terms of multi-million euro projects, the value of this site is 4 acres, 50,000 square feet in total, the convent building being 30,000 of that, gifted to the community. We've been very fortunate with donations from both America and domestically here in Ireland to help lead the regeneration of it. Siobhan, as a conservation officer, has been incredibly supportive and helpful in terms of grants we've got for heritage conservation, which would help restore and repair roof damage, guttering, and the 2/2 kind of sash windows that are there on the site. So that's it boarded up, which it has been for 16 years. And this is us meeting as a community. There's Kevin and myself working together to lead its revival. So that's one example of a project. Obviously, Cascade, Ripple, and the Heritac project, the value of those projects is just short of 1 million euro as well. We have had a brilliant town centre regeneration project in the Innovation Quarter. It's one of the oldest buildings in the town, built in the 1740s, and it was an old barracks site, and that very much lines up with Kevin's vision under the Green Town of civic-centred and people-centred space in the town centre. So it removed 2 car parks, replaced it with great civic space that's brilliant for events, as well as remote working space and office space. And Kevin is actually sitting in one of those spaces now. What else? We are also leading the regeneration of an old disused Garda station. We've been successful with €200,000 under the Thrive Fund from the EU, and that's a forerunner for about a €5 million project to revive the Garda station. And then even on a local level, we've had different businesses that have set up and who we've worked closely with that have brought life back into older buildings and restored older buildings, and very much around the energy of what we're trying to do. So we're only beginning on the project, and like I said, it goes from picking up litter to being gifted a convent building. So who knows what else may come down the line, but we're excited for the future.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for that answer. Just looking at the chat, we have a question from Rory O'Donnell, and Rory's interested in the issue of land ownership around the various sites that have been identified as locations for these projects. So I'll just read out Rory's question, if that's okay, Rory. How has the issue of land ownership and access to sites for projects been achieved, and how do you plan for the same for future projects? So, for example, Mark mentioned that the convent was gifted as a charity for the town, but the former Garda Barracks, has it been purchased? Have you encouraged CPO with Mayo County Council, or is it more geared towards bringing landowners into the fold, or both? So it's probably, I imagine, a case-by-case basis in terms of sites for projects. Would any of the panel have any comments on this?
I have a small thing from the two projects that and shows the complexity of Cascade versus Ripple, was that in Ripple we were in a housing estate in which the land that we were working on was essentially owned by Mayo County Council. So it made things very straightforward for us in implementing that. We could get permissions for the build directly through the council, who had supported our application. We obviously wanted and needed to bring the community with us on that, but from a land ownership perspective, it was a council piece. It becomes much more complex when we start thinking about the laneway, where the actual road surface might be owned by the council, but you've got shared ownership of the actual lanes themselves and the buildings. And I suppose that's why we've had to engage a much broader group of stakeholders within that. And that will also affect whether or not we take a tactical urbanism or a permanent approach in terms of where we decide to put the solution into the laneway will depend on the permissions that we can get, whether we can get them within the time frame of the project, which again can lead you maybe more towards putting the intervention into a laneway where it is primarily council owned or is less complex. So that can then change where the developments occur. What I think that rises or gives rise to is the fact that these projects take a huge amount of time, and we had 12 months in Ripple, we have 2 years within this, but complex land ownership and negotiating those things to have something that doesn't feel like a helicopter that's flown in, that's left and hasn't had that necessary engagement around it. That takes time, and these kinds of projects need to be working on a larger strategic vision.
And to add to that, in terms of specifically on the Garda Barracks site, that's a council-owned project. So where we have council-owned buildings that are heritage properties, that creates an opportunity, if the funding is there, for interesting projects to revive them. But as you said, Stephen, it is a case-by-case basis, which is very frustrating when you see poor use of space, whether it's a derelict building or 2 or 3 floors above a shop still not being used. While we've talked a lot about it, sometimes there's a lack of enthusiasm for doing it for a whole host of reasons. But there are improved powers that the local authorities are beginning to use for CPO, whether it's compulsory purchase to then sell on the open market. And there's in some instances where families have multiple different owners have inherited a property and they want it CPO'd because it cuts through all the challenges that exist within a domestic scenario like that. But it is case by case, but I think there needs to be maybe more proactive approaches that can propose and come forward with solutions to some of the building owners. and maybe some carrots. And if that doesn't work, then there should also be strong penalties at the disposal of the local authority if people are totally neglecting it, because it brings down a whole town if people don't look after their property.
I think one last point to add on that is, sorry, I think Kevin might be coming in as well.
No, you go on, sir. Yeah.
That by layering the projects in this place, it also means that it's not, you've done a project, you've left, and you've lost all of that momentum that's built. By layering these projects and you know, many of these, if not all of these projects that we've talked about today, have some involvement with Mayo County Council directly or indirectly. It then starts you have that build-up of momentum, but you also get more people coming along with you on the journey and seeing, oh, well, that was done in this building and that could be done somewhere else. Or the council starts to see this return on investment from these outward pieces of funding that are coming in, and are maybe more willing to collaborate on things that would then see transformation of buildings that they currently have in their ownership. So I think some of it is kind of a trust building and a momentum piece, that when the projects are layered within a place, I think it almost becomes easier on the land ownership and in the conversion of those things, because there's a demonstrated change that has been taking place there positively.
Yeah, and just to, I suppose, reinforce that point, I was more or less going to say the same thing, Sarah. Like the goodwill that comes from people seeing the initial actions opens them up to giving their land up, for instance, for temporary or even more permanent interventions. A good example is the project that was run and led by the cleanup, which was to plant this 10,000 trees. The trees themselves are actually quite easy to get. The more difficult thing was to get land to plant them. But because of the projects that had gone before, we were able to find landowners who were actually very willing to give up their land, and very generously so. And that was a project that was more or less, I think, all on private land at the end. But it was building off the goodwill that people had seen generated from the previous project. So it's that momentum piece.
Well, thank you very much, panel. We have another question from Miriam Linz, which I'll read out now. So Miriam would like to know more about the ideas for adopting ripple effect mapping in Cascade or in future projects, and also if this could be scaled up, given how it looks like a very resource intensive approach.
It is a very resource intensive approach, and it's something that I had used once in a different project, and we applied it in Ripple. It's something that gives you a deep dive. It's something that works well with small groupings. So if we're to use it in Cascade, it's not something you would necessarily deploy at a town-wide scale, because it works best when you have maybe a grouping of 20 or so people, like we were seeing turning up to an individual workshop in Ripple. So although we had lots more engagement, you know, over the course of it, and we tracked who came to repeat events, and you know, the total number of participants, generally we were dealing with around 20 people at a workshop. And we would maybe then have 5 or 6 of the 7 team members present for that. So we had ample resources available to us. I think it's a very good approach at finding out unknown and unintended consequences of a project. So it can tell you impacts that have come, that kind of rippling effect of impacts and consequences that you wouldn't have anticipated before you wrote the project. You maybe haven't even anticipated as the project goes on. If you think of us in Ripple, we were carrying out these workshops. We saw these 20 different people come into each workshop, but we had no way, because we didn't live in the estate, of knowing about those conversations that were taking place outside of the workshops. And so there's no questionnaire or survey really that I could design that would capture those conversations. It's a line of appreciative inquiry. So you ask questions and questions follow from that, and it's resource intensive, but it depends on what you're trying to capture. If this is a pilot study where you're trying to create a framework that other people could then implement this methodology, this approach of engaging people, perhaps the ripple effect mapping isn't necessary at the end of that, it allows us to reflect on what the process and the methodology was, so that that can be built as a guidebook or a tool that other people can implement. One of the biggest challenges, though, with participatory processes is that they are resource intensive. There's a lot of capacity building that needs to be built to deliver these kind of schemes, and quite often that is squeezed out of budgets when public projects go forward. But I think what we've found in Ripple is that we would not have had the same level of positive impact. We definitely wouldn't have won the New European Bauhaus, because we won that on the process rather than the garden being beautiful itself, as lovely as it is. The process is the important thing, and the ripple effect mapping allowed us to evaluate whether that process was good, whether it was fit for purpose. And so maybe people implementing these wouldn't necessarily need to do such an extensive process unless they're reviewing or refining the process itself. Ola has also shared the final report for Ripple and the toolkit in the chat there.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think we've come to the end of the questions on the chat. If anyone wants to submit a last minute question, please do. Maybe I'll just wrap up by asking Sarah one final question. How, just on the question of the New European Bauhaus Prize, how do you think that prize has helped you sort of disseminate or promote the Ripple project since you achieved it?
I mean, it's national coverage that we got from it. It's a huge award, as you mentioned earlier. Nobody in Ireland had ever won that prize, so it's a great achievement. But I think it's about acknowledging the interdisciplinary and the multidisciplinary aspect of it, but actually not only have you got to come up with a good solution, but that solution is beautiful and inclusive. And we're not necessarily talking beauty, just in aesthetics, but beautiful in terms of simplicity, in terms of the process being fit and practical and easy to understand. And I think the framework that the New European Bauhaus creates by having the sustainable, beautiful and inclusive makes you look beyond just what the project goals might be in terms of water management or in terms of engaging the community, to look for those multiple benefits as co-benefits rather than additional things. And I think that's what the prize allows us to communicate and articulate.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. And okay, well, we're coming up to 2 o'clock now, so I might bring the session to a close. Many thanks to our speakers, Sarah, Kevin, and Mark, for your time and for your energy in communicating your experience with us today. Thank you to Anna, my co-coordinator, and to the rest of the Centre for Irish Towns team. This presentation will be available on our Centre for Irish Towns YouTube channel, along with all previous sessions. So I invite you all to take a browse through those, some very interesting discussions. So join us in November and December for our future sessions. Details of those will be released in due course, and I would like to wish you all a very good afternoon.